Chapter 17. Take the next step.
We've been friends for so long. Maybe it's time we thought about dating.
We're here. Mina shoved the hotel room door open. It hit the wall with a thud. The group piled into the room, dragging their luggage behind them. Izuku took in his surroundings. He hadn't stayed in many hotels before. Despite the pale yellow walls and the worn carpeting, he was impressed. The suite was sizable with a main area, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a kitchenette. A queen-sized bed had been placed in the main area and a second was visible through the open bedroom door. Dibs on the bedroom, Mina declared. She dropped her bags and charged through the open door. Collapsing face first onto the bed, she moaned in satisfaction. "Kiri, you're with me." "I am." Kirishima asked. A dopey grin appeared on his face. Izuku bit the inside of his cheek as he watched Kirishima tow Mina's bags into the other room. Jiro looked at Katsuki and then at Izuku. She smirked. "I'm taking this one," she said. She made her way to the other bed and sat down on the edge. "Us girls need to stick together." Kaminari bounded over and across the bed. After clearing the mattress, he went to the window and pulled back a pair of checkered drapes. Sunlight flooded the room. "Not much of a view," he commented. "You wanna pay strip prices, go ahead," Katsuki sneered. "No thanks," Kaminari responded mildly. He released the curtains. "Where's the other room?" "Oh." Mina rolled herself off of the bed. She stood up and darted past Izuku and Katsuki and into the hallway. Izuku followed Mina, pointedly avoiding eye contact with Katsuki. His stomach had been in knots ever since lunch and it wasn't doing much better now. Mina stopped in front of the suite directly opposite them. She handed Izuku and Katsuki a card key each. They wouldn't let 6 people stay in one room, she explained. She smiled at Izuku. "Don't worry. We're as close can be if you need anything." Katsuki rolled his eyes. He pushed past the two of them and sauntered into the room. Mina lingered. She stood on her toes and touched Izuku's shoulder. "Good luck," she whispered. Izuku reddened as Mina laughed. "Let's freshen up then hit the strip," she said loudly. Kaminari cheered from the other room. Izuku looked through the open doorway and caught Jiro making a lewd gesture at him. He turned on his heel and fled. Izuku made it 3 steps inside the suite and choked. Katsuki had wasted no time. He was rummaging through his travel bag, his shirt tossed carelessly onto the floor. His tattooed dragon wings sprawled across his bare skin, the ink dark and lines jagged. His muscular shoulders and back undulated with every movement. Izuku forced himself to breathe as he internally debated whether or not Katsuki was trying to kill him. Before he was able to make that call, however, Katsuki stood and dropped his pants. Izuku felt his soul leave his body. Katsuki finally seemed to sense that he wasn't alone. He turned his head towards Izuku, fully naked save for a pair of black boxer briefs. "Room's kind of small," he said. Izuku tore his eyes away from Katsuki's impressive thighs. "Yeah," he croaked. The suite wasn't unlike his bachelor apartment. The bedroom, main area, and kitchenette had all been crushed into one space. One door led to the hallway and another to a bathroom. The bed was generously sized but, in Izuku's mind, far too small. He wondered if Katsuki would be annoyed if he asked the concierge for a cot. Izuku kept his gaze fixed on the carpet as he made his way into the room. He set his bag down as far from Katsuki as possible. "Don't look up. Don't look up," he thought. He retrieved a fresh change of clothes and his deodorant. Izuku was prepared to retreat into the bathroom when a new thought gave him pause. He was behaving strangely, wasn't he? He'd showered and changed in front of other men in public locker rooms countless times before. This was hardly different. He didn't want to make things any more uncomfortable between himself and Katsuki than they already were. Izuku's thoughts were disrupted by the sharp sound of a zippered bag being closed. He frantically yanked his shirt off. "You have a ton of freckles." Izuku stiffened. He looked up. A now clothed Katsuki was staring at his exposed torso. Izuku laughed awkwardly. I guess so," he stammered. "I don't think about it much." Katsuki's eyes narrowed. Feeling vulnerable, Izuku raised his fresh shirt over his head. "You been working out?" Katsuki asked. Izuku violently pulled his head through the neck of his shirt. If his entire body was capable of flushing, it would have done so. Izuku gathered his dirty clothes together. Was Katsuki checking him out? "I was before I got injured. I started up again a couple of weeks ago. It's important, right? Physical fitness." Izuku laughed shrilly. He felt the strong urge to shove his entire fist into his mouth. Katsuki didn't respond. Izuku manhandled his dirty clothes back into his bag. "Anyways, I'll meet you outside," he blurted. Abandoning his deodorant, he bolted from the room. In the hallway, Izuku restlessly shifted from foot to foot. His skin tingled. He reminded himself that Katsuki had only seen him shirtless. An image of Katsuki wearing only his boxer briefs flashed through Izuku's mind. He whined into the palm of his hand. Izuku sent a silent prayer up to any gods who may be listening for the strength to survive the trip. Cheers! Mina raised her oversized plastic cup in the air, its shape resembling a naked woman. It was filled with a strange pink beverage. The group raised their similarly odd concoctions and hollered. Izuku laughed and sampled his neon blue drink. The tumbler looked like something that had come out of a science laboratory. He made a face as the syrupy liquid slid down his throat. He imagined that it tasted better with alcohol. Izuku had begun to feel better once they'd left the hotel. Katsuki hadn't brought up their odd exchange and Izuku was doing his best to forget that it had happened. It wasn't exactly hot outside, but the weather was comfortable. Izuku grew excited as they neared the strip, but before they turned onto the main road, Mina pulled the group into a bar advertising a variety of over-the-top drinks. Mina looked at Izuku. "No good?" she asked. "Doubt any of them are much good," Katsuki said. He raised his beer to his lips. "Sounds like you're curious, Bakugo," Jiro teased. Katsuki growled. "F off, Deep Purple." Jiro and Kaminari had chosen the same drink as Mina. Kirishima had caved to peer pressure and purchased a colorful drink held within an egg-shaped cup. Harassing Katsuki, however, had proven less fruitful. Katsuki and Jiro continued to bicker as they turned onto the Vegas Strip. Izuku tuned them out. The contrast was striking between the strip and the side street. Numerous lanes carried traffic in both directions and a thick row of palm trees lined the center of the roadway. Countless buildings rose up around them, each competing for attention with an assortment of gimmicks. The crowds were substantial despite it being mid-afternoon. As Izuku passed in front of a massive casino hotel, he heard a multitude of shouts and other noises arise from within. Moments later, he found himself in the shadow of a gigantic lion sculpture. Beneath the sculpture, a group of muscular men clad only in jeans and cowboy hats flexed for passing tourists. Izuku watched as a young woman wearing a pink tiara stumbled towards the men. She grinned, attempting to hold herself upright while her friends screamed and took photographs. Izuku turned his head this way and that, trying to take everything in. Restaurants with flashy signage, each individual letter taller than Izuku himself. The biggest Ferris wheel that Izuku had ever seen. Open bars selling alcoholic drinks in increasingly bizarre tumblers. Casinos on top of casinos. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku saw a shoe sail through the air and hit the top of a passing car. The driver honked angrily. As Izuku walked past a replica of the Eiffel Tower, he spotted a band who had gathered a small audience. One of the members was using empty plastic tubs as a makeshift drum set, another was singing and the third was performing a strange routine that Izuku could only describe as interpretive dance. Izuku hadn't realized that he'd stopped walking until he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Oi," Katsuki said. "You're going to get left behind." Izuku blinked. He looked at Katsuki. "Sorry," he said. Katsuki grumbled. He released Izuku's shoulder. "They're waiting for us." Izuku looked ahead. He located the rest of the group roughly a block in front of them. "Right." Fumbling with his drink, Izuku pulled his wallet from his back pocket. He withdrew a bill, crumpled it, and tossed it to the performers. Katsuki frowned as they turned to leave. I can't believe you tipped them, he muttered. Izuku shrugged. I was watching them. It's only fair, right? It's fair if they're talented. Izuku snorted. You're awful. He nudged Katsuki with his elbow. Who should I tip then? You. Katsuki gave Izuku a light shove. Izuku stumbled sideways. F you. Izuku laughed. How about a beer instead, he asked. Hell no. Come on. Consider it payback. Katsuki raised an eyebrow. Payback for what? Izuku thought for a moment. For putting up with me. Katsuki stopped walking. He opened his mouth then hesitated. Guys. Izuku broke eye contact with Katsuki. He glanced ahead, Kaminari was waving at them. Izuku smiled apologetically and jogged to catch up. Mina winked at Izuku as he drew close. She checked her phone then tapped Kirihime on the shoulder. Kiri, she said. She stood on her toes and peered across the street where a large crowd had gathered. Give me your drink. I need you to pick me up. Kirihime handed his cup to Mina without hesitation and knelt down. Mina maneuvered herself handlessly onto Kirishima's shoulders with surprising ease. The contents of their tumblers had become yellow, they must have purchased refills while Izuku had been lost in his surroundings. Kirihime stood slowly. Mina found her center of balance and used her new height to peer over the crowd. Yes, she exclaimed. She wiggled her thighs on either side of Kirishima's head. Kirihime grinned stupidly. That's what I thought it was. We have to get over there. Hurry. Kirihime didn't have to be told twice. To the crosswalk, he shouted, taking off. Mina screamed, ecstatic. The rest of the group followed in hot pursuit. While everyone was waiting to cross, Izuku spotted a nearby drink stand. He snuck away and returned moments later with a bottle of water and a beer. Katsuki gave Izuku a dirty look when he pressed the beer into his hands, but he accepted it nonetheless. The group crossed the street then plunged into the crowd. It wasn't until they were in the thick of it that Izuku saw the man-made body of water that extended along the side of the walkway. Is there going to be some kind of show? Izuku guessed. Jiro smirked. Wait for it. As if on cue, booming music sounded over the reservoir. Jets of water burst forth from the water's previously calm surface, reaching high into the air. The crowd cheered as the water rose and fell in a complex arrangement, meticulously choreographed to match the tempo of the song. Izuku watched, transfixed. Mina oot and ought while Kaminari took photographs. When the song ended, the jets dwindled and the surface of the water returned to its previously dormant state. Well? Jiro asked. I didn't know that fountains could do that, Izuku said, awestruck. Maybe I should have brought my camera after all. Katsuki snorted. It's hardly worth it, he said. They're a tourist attraction. There's thousands of photos of them online already. Izuku looked at Katsuki. One day, one of your songs will play here. Katsuki looked taken aback. He cleared his throat. They don't really use our kind of music. Izuku smiled. I guess you'll be the first, then. Katsuki averted his eyes. He ran a hand through his hair. Don't say stuff like that, he muttered. Picture. Kaminari exclaimed. He charged towards the trio and thrust Jiro into Izuku's side. Let's go. The three of you. Within seconds Izuku found himself crushed between Jiro and Katsuki. He could feel Katsuki's torso pressing into his side and his face began to heat up. Kaminari took the photograph. He looked at the image and frowned. Bakugo, you have to look at the camera. I effing was. Katsuki snapped. One more time, Jiro said, ducking away. Jiro, Izuku protested. Kaminari snapped another picture. You guys are terrible at this. Kaminari sighed. Midoriya, you ought to know better. Bakugo, it'd be nice if you smiled for once. It'd be nice if you kept that goddamn camera away from me. Katsuki spat. Izuku stepped away from Katsuki. He didn't dare look at him. Kaminari shook his head and scampered off. Sorry about that, Izuku stammered. What the hell are you talking about? Katsuki retorted. Deku. Ka-chan. Mina waved at them. Come here. We're trying to figure out plans for tonight. You're going to love the Vegas nightlife, Midoriya. Kirishima crowed. It's wild. Katsuki trudged over. I ain't hitting, tonight, he declared. I'm effing tired. Heading back after dinner. Kaminari gaped at Katsuki. Bakugo. We're in Vegas. Big effing deal. There'll be other nights. Katsuki folded his arms. Kaminari looked at the group and gestured toward Katsuki. Mina pursed her lips. Leave him alone, Denki, she said. Ka-chan's had a lot on his plate. Her eyes drifted over to Izuku. Izuku, how are you feeling? She asked. Do you want to head back too? Izuku knew exactly what Mina was doing. Before he could reply, though, Kirishima cut in. Midoriya hasn't been to Vegas before, he said slowly. He should come out. Right. He looked at Izuku uncertainly. Izuku nodded furiously. Yes, he said. Definitely. I'll. Definitely come out. Mina huffed. Your call, she said flippantly. She flicked Kirishima's temple. Kaminari beamed. At least Midoriya knows how to have fun. He grabbed Izuku by the elbow. I need another drink before the sun goes down, he said. Let's go. Izuku laughed. He allowed Kaminari to lead him away. When he glanced back, he noticed that Jiro was trailing with Katsuki. He watched as Jiro patted the blonde on the back, her mouth forming unintelligible words. Katsuki shrugged her off. For the briefest of moments, Izuku could have sworn that he looked frustrated. Katsuki was already asleep when Izuku returned to the hotel that night. It was far too late by then to request a cot. Izuku chewed on his lip, then felt around for his duffel bag and tiptoed to the bathroom. Remerging in his pajamas, Izuku carefully slipped into the bed. He turned onto his side, his body as stiff as a board. Izuku listened to the gentle rise and fall of Katsuki's breaths, all too aware that the slightest of movements could have the potential to create physical contact between them. His stomach flipped. Izuku forced his eyes shut. He spent the night clinging to the edge of the mattress and waiting for morning to come. Have you talked to Mina yet? Izuku whispered to Kirishima. Cut me some slack, Kirishima whispered back. His eyes darted nervously in front of him. Mina was swinging a large shopping bag back and forth as she chatted animatedly with Jiro several paces ahead. Mina was dead on her feet when we got back last night. We both crashed. Izuku nodded in understanding. He tiredly rubbed one of his eyes. The group hadn't stayed out late in the end. By the time they'd eaten and checked out a couple of bars, Kirishima and Mina had called it quits. Izuku had returned to the hotel with them while Kaminari and Jiro had stayed out, the former citing the lap dance that the latter owed him. The Vegas nightlife, even in the early evening, was wilder than Izuku could have imagined. He could still see the neon signs and flashing lights when he closed his eyes. How are things with Bakugo? Kirishima asked. Izuku frowned. Things are good. I think. Izuku had barely managed to fall asleep that night. When he'd awoken in the morning, the other side of the bed had been empty. Katsuki had returned some time later with a flushed face and a soaked tank. He'd grunted at Izuku in acknowledgement before he'd stalked to the bathroom and shut the door. Things aren't bad at least. Kirishima chuckled. I guess that's the best you can expect when it comes to him. Izuku sagged, but he smiled. Kirishima was probably right. The girls shouted. Izuku looked at where they were pointing and grinned. Time to make up for that shopping spree. Mina exclaimed. Time to make up for last night, Jiro said with a grimace. Time to hit the jackpot. Kaminari shouted, pumping his fist. Izuku looked at the massive signs plastered around the entrance to the casino and the huge hotel looming behind it. He couldn't begin to fathom what it must cost to stay at a place like this. Kaminari opened the door and beckoned everyone inside. The atmosphere shifted the second that Izuku stepped through the doors. The chatter and shouts of guests echoed off the sleek walls all the way up to the concierge. The scent of stale cigarette smoke was overpowering. 3 different types of music played from 3 different locations. Izuku wrinkled his nose and waved his hand in front of his face. "Better get used to it," Katsuki muttered as he passed Izuku. "Right," Izuku murmured. Izuku heard the slot machines before he saw them. As they passed the concierge, the telltale sound of the machines grew louder. By the time they reached the card kiosk, they were completely surrounded. It was like looking into a sea of neon. The noise was cacophonous, each slot machine hummed its own tune and emitted a set of auditory effects that ranged from jingling bells to ringing alarms. As Izuku patiently waited his turn, he looked about himself. Patrons of the casino ranged from young adults to senior citizens, each of them hunched over their respective machines. Izuku watched a woman old enough to be his grandmother pull a lever as a heavy-set man 2 machines over from her performed the same action. The numbers on their screens began to rapidly spin as the slots played the same tune at slightly different intervals. When a series of tiny stars flew across the screens and bells began to sound, Izuku knew that he'd made a terrible mistake. Izuku swayed as an intense wave of dizziness overtook him. He tried to clear his head by looking in the opposite direction only to see the word winner flash across another screen 6 feet away from him in massive block letters. Izuku groaned and covered his eyes with his hands. Everything in the casino suddenly felt much too bright, the stench of smoke overwhelming. "Hey, Midoriya!" Kaminari nudged Izuku. "It's your turn." Izuku lowered his hands and looked at Kaminari. "I don't think." Izuku clamped his mouth shut as a wave of nausea hit him. He hunched over. "Oi, Deku!" Katsuki's voice rose over the racket. "You good?" Izuku wanted very badly to say yes. He gave Katsuki a thumbs up instead. Izuku heard Katsuki sigh. He felt a sturdy hand grip his shoulder. "Go ahead," Katsuki said to the group. "We'll catch up." Katsuki forced Izuku upright and marched him out of the casino. The reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder was enough to keep him moving. Even after he stumbled out the front doors, the slot machines continued to jangle around inside his head. Izuku lowered his eyes and focused his efforts on putting one foot in front of the other. "Sit," Katsuki said. Izuku raised his head. They'd turned onto a side street. The noise from the strip had been reduced to a dull roar and the bright lights of Vegas were momentarily out of view. Katsuki scowled and jabbed his finger at one of the wooden benches that lined the sidewalk. "Sit down," he repeated. Izuku acquiesced. He didn't realize how badly he'd needed to until he felt the solid bench beneath him. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. "What's wrong with you?" Katsuki asked. "Ugh," Izuku said. "I'm a little dizzy. I think the slot machines were too much for me." Katsuki paused. "Do you need to go to the hospital?" he asked slowly. Despite his state, Izuku snorted. "What? No, Ka-chan. I'm fine. I just need a minute." Katsuki grunted. Izuku felt the bench shift as Katsuki sat down next to him. "You can go back in," Izuku said. "I'm sorry about this. I'll meet up with you guys later. I'll go back to the hotel or grab a coffee and walk around." Katsuki drummed his fingers against his knee. "You gonna die if I leave you here?" Izuku chuckled. "No." Katsuki nodded once, then stood up. "Hang on. Don't try to take off yet." Izuku frowned. Okay." Izuku watched Katsuki saunter away. The nausea was fading but his dizziness persisted. Izuku leaned forward on the bench. The fresh air and the warm sun on his neck comforted him. The next time that Izuku opened his eyes, the world was no longer spinning. He righted himself, content to quietly observe passers-by. There was an ice cream parlor across the street and Izuku watched in silent amusement as patrons left with increasingly bizarre cones. "Here." Izuku felt something warm being pushed into his chest. He looked down and saw a coffee cup. "1 and 2, right?" Katsuki grunted. Izuku nodded. He wrapped his hands around the cup. "How did you?" He raised his eyebrows. I thought you were going back to the casino. Katsuki retook his place next to Izuku. He was holding a coffee cup of his own. I did. Gave the idiots my card. Told M to go nuts. Guilt washed over Izuku. But Kaken, he protested. I thought you were looking forward to the casinos. I don't want you to miss out on them because of me. Who said I was looking forward to them? Katsuki raised his cup to his mouth. Vegas slots piss me off. All of them are rigged. Izuku blinked. But Mina said you did well. On blackjack, Katsuki corrected. Effing pink face was so blitzed that night, I'm surprised she remembers anything. Izuku snickered guiltily. He took a sip from his coffee. So you like card games? Katsuki shrugged. Don't care much either way. Blackjack's easy money if you know how to bluff. He ran his thumb along the edge of his cup. That few grand got us through the rest of that tour. Izuku shook his head. You are terrible, you know that. Katsuki smirked. Izuku watched Katsuki take a sip of his coffee. He looked down at his own. I thought I was over these dizzy spells, he admitted softly. I haven't had one in weeks. He laughed weakly. It's a bit embarrassing, to be honest. Katsuki threw his free arm around the bench. It happens, he said. Izuku smiled. Thanks for the coffee. I feel a lot better. Yeah, well. Katsuki kept his gaze fixed across the street. Good. A peaceful silence fell between them. Izuku sipped his coffee. He'd be perfectly happy to sit next to Katsuki for the rest of the day. He was close, almost close enough to touch. It would be so easy to lean in and... No. Izuku forced the thought from his mind. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Izuku remembered the tattoo on Katsuki's chest. He swallowed. So. Izuku cleared his throat. If you don't want to go back to the casino, what would you like to do? Katsuki's brow furrowed. He remained silent for some time. Eventually his expression cleared. You up for a hike? When Katsuki and Izuku met up with the rest of the group, it was past nightfall. Izuku waved enthusiastically as he approached, dirty with dried sweat and slouched with fatigue. Kaminari flitted back and forth between them. Where did you two run off to? He asked. We went out to the canyon. Izuku exclaimed. He beamed. It was amazing. The views were incredible. The rocks were so red. It was like stepping onto Mars. He paused to take a breath. The sunset was gorgeous too, you guys should have seen it. Some of the paths were steep and we had to climb part of the way, but wow! It was totally worth it. Oh! That sounds so nice, Mina said, clasping her hands together. Katsuki grinned. Kaminari made a pained sound. Are you telling me that you guys bailed on the casinos to go on a nature walk? He screeched. Katsuki's grin faded. Wouldn't expect you to appreciate it, Blondie, he snapped. Kirishima playfully wrestled Kaminari into a headlock. Come on, bro, he said. He shot a toothy smile in Izuku's direction. It sounds like they had fun. Am I the only person who knows where we are? Kaminari cried out. Izuku laughed. He looked at Katsuki, who was scowling at the pavement. We had a lot of fun, he said. Katsuki shoved his hands into his pockets and kicked at a piece of litter. The girls exchanged a look. Izuku stuck close to Katsuki for the rest of the night. Izuku awoke early the next morning with the threat of a headache looming behind his eyes. He groaned and rubbed his face. When he opened his eyes, all that Izuku could see was Katsuki's back. His black tank was rumpled and one of its thick straps was twisted off of his shoulder. As Izuku's senses returned, he felt an ankle overlapping a foot. Izuku panicked. He raised his head and realized that he hadn't moved all that much during the night. It was, in fact, Katsuki, who had stretched out and was taking up 2/3 of the mattress, his arms splayed in front of him as though he was fighting an unseen monster. Izuku let his head fall against the pillows. He closed his eyes. It was okay if he didn't move, wasn't it? He wasn't the one who had created this situation. Izuku listened to Katsuki's peaceful inhalations. He basked in the lingering musk of a restful night's sleep. He wondered what it would be like to wake up in each other's arms. He imagined how nice it would feel to lean in and press a kiss to Katsuki's tattooed shoulder. A deep sadness unexpectedly welled up inside of Izuku. Izuku sighed, then forced himself up. He grabbed his pain meds from his bag before he dragged himself to the bathroom. It would be better for him if he warded off any chance of a migraine early. Izuku downed 2 pills, then splashed his face with cold water. He looked at himself in the mirror and thought back to the prior day. Exploring the canyon with Katsuki had been amazing. Izuku watched his smile fade. He'd decided to set his feelings aside, but the longer that they spent together, the greater the divide grew between what Katsuki and Izuku had and what Izuku wanted them to have. Izuku couldn't have fathomed how difficult it would be to be Katsuki's friend. Izuku grabbed a towel and patted his face dry. Vegas was making things harder than necessary. It would be easier once he was home. When Izuku exited the bathroom, Katsuki was awake. He'd shifted back onto his side of the bed and was looking at something on his phone with one eye cracked. He glanced up when Izuku returned. Izuku smiled apologetically. "Did I wake you?" he asked. He tentatively took a seat at the edge of the bed. Katsuki blinked slowly. "Alarm went off," he said groggily. "Oh." Izuku stared at his hands. Today would be their last day in Vegas. Izuku wasn't sure whether he felt relieved or distressed. Katsuki sat up. He leaned forward, stretching his back. Izuku picked up his phone and scrolled through it distractedly while Katsuki walked around the suite. Katsuki was shoving his feet into a pair of sneakers when someone knocked at the door. Izuku's lips parted. The others shouldn't be up yet, it was too early. Katsuki glanced at Izuku before he headed for the door. Izuku's phone vibrated. "Sorry, dude. Mina says enjoy. Room service." The voice was unfamiliar. Izuku heard the door close. Katsuki returned half a moment later with a tray that held 2 plates and mugs. He looked at Izuku suspiciously. Izuku raised his hands defensively. "It wasn't me," he said. Katsuki stared at him a moment longer before he set the tray down on top of the bed. He lifted the lid off of one of the plates. It was covered with a heaping pile of eggs, bacon and hash browns. Katsuki looked at Izuku. "Think one of the a-holes sent it." Izuku nodded. "Kirishima texted me. He said that it was Mina." Katsuki frowned. "He texted you?" Izuku felt the hairs on his neck rise. He gestured towards the tray. "Why don't we give it back to them?" "F that," Katsuki replied. "I'm starving." He sat down on the bed, crossed his legs and grabbed the nearest plate. Izuku couldn't help but smile as he watched Katsuki dig into the food with machine-like efficiency. He hesitantly picked up the other plate. "Do you go for a run every morning?" Izuku asked around a mouthful of eggs. Katsuki swallowed. "More or less," he said. "Whenever I can make the time." "That's a good idea," Izuku said. "I should do that too." Katsuki eyed him. "Can you handle it right now?" Izuku frowned. He jabbed his fork into a hash brown. "I'm not that fragile," he said, irked. "I was fine at the canyon yesterday, wasn't I? Besides, I've been running around all over the city taking photographs and doing interviews for weeks." Katsuki shoved a strip of bacon into his mouth. "You're doing interviews?" Izuku nodded. "I interviewed Monoma from prison while you were on tour," he replied. "I interviewed a street artist named AI as well. I've been talking to Kendo, Monoma's girlfriend, and she said that she might have some other contacts for me. Everything's coming together really well." Katsuki's eyes narrowed. "Okay," he said. "I'll bite." "What's the vision?" Izuku grinned. "A large-scale photography project focusing on social resistance," he said. "I'm going to write a companion piece for it as well. I want to spotlight people who are trying to better their society in unconventional ways. Monoma has some really interesting ideas. I can't say that I agree with all of them, but I liked what he said about giving the power back to the people. It's not something that I've thought much about before. It makes me wonder whether there is a place in our society for bad behavior. If a police officer is abusing their authority, maybe they deserve to have paint thrown at them. Maybe people should stop and listen when bands like the Anti-Heroes scream. Izuku took a bite and chewed thoughtfully. It might not be the neatest way to push for change, but I believe that it comes from a good place. I think that kind of passion could really resonate with a lot of people. Maybe I could be a part of it by inspiring the public to help each other and themselves. Izuku paused to take a breath. He flushed. Sorry. I'm rambling, aren't I? Katsuki was staring at Izuku. Izuku squirmed under his gaze. Katsuki closed his mouth. He shook his head. God damn. Izuku whimpered. Is it stupid? He asked. You can tell me if it is. It's not stupid, Katsuki muttered. He looked at his empty plate. It's effing great. Izuku started. Really? Katsuki nodded slowly. It took every fiber in Izuku's being not to fling himself across the bed and hug Katsuki. He set his plate down. I thank you, Ka-chan. That means so much. Katsuki looked at Izuku. He chewed on the inside of his cheek. I've been thinking about the new album, he said slowly. He picked up one of the mugs and rotated it in his hands. I've got some ideas, but nothing seems good enough. It needs more. Izuku thought for a moment. My idea only started to come together while I was wandering around the city taking photographs of whatever seemed interesting, he admitted. Have you ever tried taking that kind of approach? What if you just created a bunch of stuff and saw what happens? Katsuki set the mug down. Sounds disorganized as hell. Well, if it doesn't work out, you can always try taking a baseball bat to the back of the head, Izuku joked. Katsuki snorted into his fist. I guess if you don't mind the brain damage. Izuku shrugged and grinned. What's a little brain damage in the name of art? Katsuki laughed. It's amazing that you're not dead with a philosophy like that, he teased. Izuku grinned. Far from it, he replied. I feel better than I have in ages. Plus now I've got a cool battle scar. Katsuki's smirk faded. Can I see it? He asked. Izuku flushed. It was a joke, he exclaimed, waving his hands in embarrassment. Katsuki said nothing. Izuku faltered. For the life of him, he couldn't imagine why Katsuki would want to see his scar. It wasn't anything to be proud of. On the other hand, unlike Kaminari, Katsuki had actually asked permission. Izuku was certain that if he said no, Katsuki would let it go. Perhaps that was why he lowered his head. Katsuki's fingers felt slow and uncertain. They sent shivers through Izuku's body that had nothing to do with the shivers he'd felt when Kaminari had touched his scalp. Izuku felt his chest constrict. Eventually Izuku raised his head. Katsuki's expression was unreadable, their faces only inches apart. It's not very big, Izuku said, his voice barely above a whisper. Katsuki mumbled something that Izuku didn't catch. Neither of them broke eye contact. Time seemed to slow to a standstill. Katsuki brought his hand around to the side of Izuku's face. Izuku watched a light furrow form along Katsuki's brow. Katsuki hesitated, then closed his eyes and leaned forward. Izuku jolted. He pulled Katsuki's hand away from his face. Well, he said. He forced a smile. Katsuki stared at him, the perfect picture of confusion. If Mina and the others are awake, they'll probably want to leave soon. You should go for your run while you still can. Yeah. Katsuki's reply was eerily quiet. Do you? I'm going to take a shower. Izuku loudly interrupted. He jumped off of the bed and raced to the bathroom, shutting the door behind him. Behind the bathroom door, Izuku's face cracked. He began to shake. This was too much. This was too painful. Katsuki was being unfair. Katsuki was the one who had called Izuku a distraction. Izuku had done the right thing and backed off. He couldn't possibly expect Izuku to moderate both of their behaviors. Izuku locked the bathroom door. He didn't get into the shower until he heard the other close. Kaminari grinned and winked at a waitress as she handed him a huge beer off of an overstuffed serving tray. The waitress smiled politely. Her work uniform barely amounted to more than a brightly colored bathing suit. Izuku vaguely wondered how much she was being paid as she passed drinks around the large, circular table. When she passed him an oversized whiskey ginger that the group had harassed him into getting, he smiled apologetically. Mina squealed delightedly over her fishbowl cocktail, embellished with a variety of candies and fruit. Kirishima eyed the drink and then Mina. Judging by their interactions, he still hadn't spoken to her. Izuku could feel Katsuki's gaze honing in on him. It set him on edge. He'd been acting peculiar since the incident that morning. Izuku thought that he'd been imagining it at first, but judging by the encouraging gestures he'd been receiving from the girls, he wasn't the only one who had noticed. Izuku deliberately avoided Katsuki's gaze and took in the sights of the lounge instead. The place had a swanky atmosphere, the lights were set low, creating a sultry ambience, and fire tables enclosed the sitting area. Neon lights lined the bar and stage. So, Midoriya. Izuku's gaze turned to Kaminari. How was your first time in Vegas? Izuku took a sip of his drink. It was great, he replied. I'm glad I came. Kaminari smirked. That's a relief. You've been spending so much time with Kaken that I wondered whether you were actually enjoying yourself. Izuku spluttered. Next to him, Katsuki growled. Jiro elbowed Kaminari. Finish your drink and I'll buy you another, she said. It's so kind of Kyuka to share her winnings with us, Kaminari said. He gave Jiro a shit-eating grin. I didn't win that much. Jiro protested. 300 doesn't go far in Vegas. It'd go further if you and Denki weren't out every night buying drinks for cute girls, Mina playfully scolded. Jiro shrugged. It worked out pretty well for me. Did you get a number? Izuku asked. A number and a letter, Jiro said with a wink. The letter O. Oh my god, Izuku said. He put his head down on the table. Mina and Kaminari cackled gleefully. Kirishima reached across the table and high-fived Jiro. Way to go, he said. Izuku raised his head. How'd the rest of you do? Kaminari slumped. I lost 200, he lamented. I ate 50, Kirishima admitted. I won $3.50. Mina announced. Katsuki snickered into his fist. Try not to spend it all in one place, he said. Mina pouted. She slid down in her seat and kicked at Katsuki underneath the table. The music in the lounge faded out and was replaced by an old jazzy tune. The crowd cheered as a trio of sequin-covered burlesque dancers took to the stage. Not long after, Kaminari and Jiro abandoned the table in favor of moving closer to the stage. The table was quieter with the two of them gone. Mina watched the girls on stage, humming along to the music contentedly. Izuku nursed his drink while Katsuki ordered a second and then a third beer. Izuku glanced at Kirishima. He was watching Mina watch the show with the most endearing expression he'd ever seen on the redhead's face. His eyes drifted towards Izuku and he stiffened, rubbing the back of his neck guiltily. Izuku felt Katsuki nudge him with his shoulder for the umpteenth time that night. Izuku sighed and turned towards the blonde. He supposed that he could only avoid speaking to Katsuki for so long. What? His response came out more abruptly than Izuku had intended. Katsuki looked taken aback. He opened his mouth then paused. Earlier, he started. Don't worry about it, Izuku replied quickly. Katsuki remained quiet for several minutes. You pissed? Izuku startled. What? No. His reply was loud enough to draw the attention of both Kirishima and Mina. Izuku reddened and waved them off, adjusting his tone. I'm not mad. I'm just, he trailed off. Katsuki's mouth twisted unpleasantly. Izuku couldn't help but think that it was his fault. It was possible that avoiding conversation with Katsuki all day hadn't been the best solution. Ka-chan, he whispered. He reached over and squeezed his knee. It's okay. I promise. Katsuki stiffened. Izuku, realizing what he'd done, retracted his hand. They both looked away. When a hand grabbed Izuku's leg out of the blue nearly an hour later, Izuku almost jumped out of his skin. He side-eyed Katsuki. His gaze may have been focused on the show, but his hand clutched Izuku's leg with an uncomfortably tight grip. His jaw was clenched and his shoulders were stiff. Izuku's stomach burst into butterflies. Izuku tried to process the situation with no small degree of confusion. Since Izuku had rejected him that morning, Katsuki had been behaving like a wounded animal. Was it possible that he was having second thoughts? It sounded too good to be true. Izuku decided to leave his hand be. After a few minutes, Katsuki seemed to relax and his grip on Izuku's leg loosened. Izuku was glad, although he didn't want to push Katsuki away, his leg was starting to become numb. He nursed his drink while Katsuki ordered another beer. They didn't speak for the remainder of the performance. As Katsuki finished his fifth beer, his hand began to inch down Izuku's thigh closer to his hand. His movements were excruciatingly slow. Izuku felt tempted more than once to simply grab his hand and be done with it. He held back, though, partially out of nerves and partially because he found it incredibly endearing. Izuku recalled the conversation he'd had with Kirishima back at the rest stop. It couldn't be true. The idea that someone as amazing as Katsuki might have never had a proper relationship was more than Izuku could comprehend. As Katsuki's hand slowly nudged Izuku's, Izuku had to choke back a sob. It wasn't right for a man as confident and tough as Katsuki to be this cute. Suddenly the blonde shifted. He removed his hand from Izuku's leg and shoved it into his pants pocket. When he retrieved his vibrating phone and unlocked it, Izuku's heart dropped. Back in a second, Katsuki murmured. He stood and exited the lounge. Izuku could have screamed in frustration. Instead he looked for a distraction. Across the table from him, Mina was resting her head on Kirishima's shoulder. Both of them clapped enthusiastically as the show wrapped up. When Kirishima glanced Izuku's way, Izuku shot him a purposeful look. "Talk to her," he mouthed. Kirishima's brow creased. Careful not to catch Mina's attention, Izuku slowly flexed his bicep in what he imagined was a macho way. Kirishima grinned toothily at Izuku. His expression cleared. Izuku's lips parted in surprise as Kirishima nodded determinedly, then turned to Mina. "I'm going to go grab another drink," Izuku announced loudly. He leapt out of his seat and hightailed it to the bar, barely acknowledging Mina's confused wave. The bar was only a short distance from their table. Izuku smiled at the bartender as he gestured towards one of the beers on tap, his mind elsewhere. He'd been hoping to give Kirishima and Mina some space, but the post-performance lull allowed Izuku to overhear parts of their conversation despite his best efforts. "I know, been years since. Ag? What? After, things were weird, wanted to give you some space, but I never." Mina sounded emotional. "You never, thought, tainted or something?" Kirishima's stricken gasp cut through the crowd. "No. Never, should have been there." Mina burst into tears. "Oh, Ag, not your fault. I never blamed. Love you." Forgetting the beer entirely, Izuku pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled through his social media feeds. This wasn't meant for his ears. After a long period of silence, Izuku took a chance and glanced at the table. He regretted it almost immediately. Kirishima and Mina were in full lip lock. He looked away, his ears burning. Izuku rotated his beer on the bar top. He stared into the pale effervescent liquid. He was happy for Kirishima and Mina, but the situation left him in a bit of an awkward position. Kaminari and Jiro were nowhere in sight. Kirishima and Mina were completely engrossed in each other. Along with a pang of jealousy came a strong sense of isolation. Izuku became all too aware that he was standing alone at a bar in the middle of Las Vegas. Who was he kidding? Nothing was ever going to happen with Katsuki. He'd been stupid to think otherwise for even a second. If Katsuki's words weren't enough, then his actions were. The guy had other priorities. Izuku felt a presence slide up next to him. "Looks like crappy hair finally made his move," Katsuki muttered. "Yeah," Izuku replied quietly. He glanced at Katsuki. "Wait. You knew?" "Of course I knew." Katsuki shoved his hands into his pockets. "A-hole's been whining to me about her for years." Izuku chuckled unhappily. "Right," he said. That made sense. They were friends, after all. Katsuki glanced at the beer in Izuku's hands. You still drinking? He asked. Not really. Izuku offered Katsuki the glass. Do you want it? Katsuki eyed the beer before he accepted it. Where are the other two? He asked, downing half the contents. I haven't seen them. Izuku searched for something to say. Did you take care of whatever you needed to? Katsuki finished the beer and set the glass down on the bar. Yeah, he said. We're doing a small show a few days after we get back. I was waiting on the confirmation. Izuku smiled despite his poor mood. If there was one thing that he could count on, it was that Katsuki would always have plans for the band. Do you ever stop working? He asked. Katsuki scowled. What are you talking about? I've barely done anything this entire trip. Izuku paused. Now that he thought about it, he only recalled seeing Katsuki on his phone a handful of times over the past few days. Katsuki glanced around the lounge disinterestedly. He tapped his fingers on the bar. Wanna get out of here? He asked. Izuku frowned. Why? Katsuki shrugged. I'm over all this, he said. He looked at Izuku meaningfully. We could just bail. For some reason, Izuku's entire body tingled. Yeah, he heard himself say. Okay. The night might have been cool if not for the dense crowds that filled the streets. Tipsy tourists swarmed over every square inch of sidewalk, many spilling out and onto the road. In front of bars and casinos, the crowds became almost impossible to walk through. High heels lay abandoned in the gutters. Homeless men sat on nearly every corner and beckoned to the masses for donations. A bride in a torn dress stumbled past Izuku and Katsuki while 3 police cars sped along the boulevard with blaring sirens. Effing Vegas, Katsuki muttered as they sidestepped a man who was vomiting into a trash can. When they turned down a side street, the loudness of the strip began to fade. Not long after, Izuku felt Katsuki's eyes on him again. Steeling himself, Izuku returned the gaze. Katsuki flinched and averted his eyes. Moments later, Katsuki's shoulder bumped against Izuku's. Neither of them moved away. Katsuki and Izuku remained silent for the rest of the walk to the hotel. As they took the elevator up to their level, Izuku was possessed by a sudden sense of trepidation. There was no denying it, something felt off. It took Izuku a couple of attempts to get the door unlocked, but Katsuki didn't seem to mind. When he opened it shakily, Katsuki pushed past him. Before Izuku knew what was happening, Katsuki had circled around him. Izuku gasped as Katsuki pushed him up against the back of the door. The lock clicked itself shut. Ka-ka-chan. Izuku wheezed, barely managing to push the syllables through his vocal cords. Katsuki placed his hands on either side of Izuku's head and leaned into his personal space. Izuku could smell the beer on his breath. He didn't dare move. He didn't dare speak. Katsuki's gaze was unfocused. His lips were parted but no sound came out. It was as though he was searching for something and coming up empty. He looked, truth be told, a little bit lost. Deku. Since its beginning, Izuku's relationship with Katsuki had been punctuated with gaps. They'd gone through long periods of time without contact, left important words unsaid, and created physical barriers between their bodies and emotional barriers between their minds. Izuku trembled from head to toe, but it wasn't out of nervousness. Katsuki, he breathed. Izuku saw something shift behind Katsuki's eyes. For a moment, the space closed. Katsuki shoved himself against Izuku and kissed him fervently. Izuku threw caution to the wind and flung his arms around Katsuki's shoulders, returning the kiss with equal intensity. Katsuki's hands found Izuku's waist. Izuku eagerly continued the kiss as Katsuki half-dragged him over to the bed. There was a desperation in both of their actions that made their movements erratic and left Izuku wanting more. Katsuki pushed Izuku onto the bed and climbed on top of him. Without hesitation Izuku reached up, grabbed Katsuki by the front of his shirt and pulled him down. Izuku groaned over the welcome sensation of Katsuki's weight bearing down on him. He frantically explored every inch of Katsuki within arm's reach. Katsuki was slower to respond. He hissed softly when Izuku pulled at his lower lip, then lowered his head and slipped his tongue into Izuku's mouth. It wasn't enough. Izuku arched his back into Katsuki. He couldn't think straight. Katsuki moved his hand to cup Izuku's jaw as he deepened the kiss. Izuku's hands wandered lower and lower until they passed over the curve of Katsuki's ass. He could feel the front of his jeans becoming uncomfortably tight. With newfound confidence, Izuku firmly squeezed Katsuki's ass, then slid one of his hands into the crevice between his upper thighs. Katsuki froze. He retracted his tongue from Izuku's mouth. Izuku tried to kiss his neck. Katsuki shook his head. He slowly pushed himself up off of Izuku. Izuku's hands fell to his sides. "Ka-chan?" he asked breathlessly. Katsuki's pupils were blown, his eyes wide in his head. He said. He climbed off of the bed and started to pace while he tugged at his hair. Izuku sat up and moved to the edge of the bed. "Ka-chan, what's wrong?" "Shut up," Katsuki snapped. "What am I? Ka-chan," Izuku protested. "Please. Shut up." Izuku's stomach lurched. "Talk to me." "Shut the F up." Katsuki roared. "No." Izuku snapped. "I won't. Not until you tell me what's." Katsuki screamed, turned, and drove his fist into the wall. There was a loud crack as his hand broke through the plaster. Flecks of compound flew into the air. Izuku yelped and leapt backwards. Katsuki cursed and grabbed his hand. He looked at Izuku with a crazed expression. A heartbeat of silence passed. "Ka-chan," Izuku said weakly. Katsuki turned on his heel. Izuku's mind took a moment to catch up. He scrambled off of the bed, his heart in his throat. "Wait, Ka-chan!" Katsuki ignored him. "Wait!" Izuku shouted again. Katsuki stalked to the main door, flung it open, and slammed it shut in Izuku's face so hard that the walls shook. "Katsuki, you effing a-hole!" Izuku screamed through the door. He fell to the ground. Angry sobs racked his body as hot tears fell onto clenched fists. Izuku pressed his forehead to the dirty carpet and wept.